Hello and welcome to Next Gen Log Management, Maximize Logs Value with Telemetry Pipelines. Today's webinar is sponsored by Mezmo and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great session, we have a few housekeeping items that are going to help you get the most out of it. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering a lot of great resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to 3 PDFs for you. There's a telemetry blueprint, one on data transformations, and an O'Reilly report on the fundamentals of telemetry pipelines. Then we've got links for data profiling and why telemetry pipelines should be a part of your compliance strategy. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. You must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to get your questions asked by our expert presenter. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. All right, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We have Bill Belknap. Bill, I apologize.
Oh, Scott, you practiced in everything, and that's okay. It's all right, man.
Anyway, Bill, Vice President of Technical Services at Mezmo. Delighted to have you here. Take it away.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. A big happy hi from a very sunny Milwaukee. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the topic, of course, next generation log management and what we mean by that and what all of that stuff is. But before I do, I wanted to ask everybody a quick question, and that is this. I wanted to just to understand from folks in the audience what experience you have with telemetry pipelines. And I'll use this to kind of shape some of the things I talk about. So if we're all good and everybody knows, then great. If we need a little, course on what it is or a little extra explanation, I'm happy to provide that as well. So I'll give you all a few minutes to answer, and then I'll actually reveal the results as well, so you kind of know where everybody is and kind of what direction that I'm going in. Actually, I'll just go ahead and click next now. We may get a few more, but interesting to me, and I would say actually not unusual, as I've been speaking to customers and at other conferences. Certainly, this has kind of been the ratio where most folks are. What's the telemetry pipeline? Why are we talking about it? What does it do? All of those kinds of things. So that's good. Then you're definitely in the right place. And we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about why those things are important to next generation log management. So let me jump in. And I want to spend a little bit of time up front framing the problem. And I will start with things that are obvious, and you're going to look at it and say, Bill, yep, we get that. Could you please move on and kind of get to the point? Stay with me for the buildup, because there's a direction I'm going in, I'll say. And then I'll actually jump from there into what we at Mezmo think of as next generation log management, and walk you through how we plan to and are actually providing it. So with that, let me get started. So the obvious, the Captain Obvious statement is this: like everybody that I talk to, every customer, as we, interface and do stuff with folks, the story is the same. Log management, log data is growing. It's crazy. It's off the charts. We have more than we know what to do with, and as a result, lots of kind of uncomfortable or bad things are happening. We're struggling to be able to make good use of it the way that we want to. We don't necessarily really understand kind of what to do with all of this stuff. And the way that we're looking at it and kind of framing it up is based on the graph that you see here on the left, which essentially is this. As the volume of log data goes up that you're working with, and I'll even say, I may go back and forth and say telemetry data as well, because at some point we'll talk a little bit about traces and metrics and some of the other things that you would bring in. But certainly as the volume of your log data goes up, the cost definitely goes up. But what we're finding is value kind of stays flat. And you're not really, so you're spending more to get the same amount of value, which nobody really wants to do. And so let's talk about why that's happening, because I think, that part's kind of important. First of all, I think a lot of folks would agree that at the end of the day, the value of log data is temporal, right? Like most of the time, I probably don't need 80% of the log data that I'm looking at. And then when I need it, and I need all of it, and I need it fast. The problem with today's log management tools are, like, if I want it, I've got to put it all in there because I just don't know when I'm going to need it. So there's no way for me to necessarily say, oh, like, I don't want all of this, and oh wait, now I want it. No, I don't. So most folks end up putting it all in. It makes it expensive. On top of that, so not just the observability tool or log management tool itself. On top of that, there's more of it. Your application stack is way more complex, more stuff spitting out log information. Developers happily like, hey, I need to see all this stuff, so I'm going to throw it all out there. And so there's a higher degree of complexity, and with a higher degree of complexity means there's more work actually getting the use out of the log itself. So more not only means more cost, more also means more complexity and more work actually trying to get value out of it. So that force kind of continuing to push that value line down. We've also noticed that there are now many more consumers of log data. So it's not just developers who are trying to troubleshoot or debug code. Obviously, your observability teams, your monitoring teams, and things like that tend to want to be able to look at or get a hold of it and do interesting things with it. We've also found that in looking at our customers, a good portion of folks that would traditionally be on, what I'm going to call the business side, and it's a very general label, but folks that are actually looking for business related metrics realize I can sometimes get that data out of logs quicker than if I have to go to my app dev team and say, hey, can you adjust my application? Can you change it, add to it so that it spits out these metrics for me or does these things? What they find is like, wow, that stuff actually is being put in a log. And if I can just get that log and it's locked in there, I've got to do some parsing and things with it. But if I can get that data out of there, like now I don't have to go through this application change process. I don't have to wait for developers to produce it. It's already there and I'm using it. But again, a lot of work associated to it, and I have to weed through a lot of data to be able to get to it. So the 43% stat I'll throw out there, this is my semi-scientific. If I look at the conversations that I've had over the past 6 months and in kind of going through notes and things and looking at, well, how many challenges did this person articulate, or what did these people really talk about? And if I kind of group it up and did a little bit of normalization, I would say that 43% of the issues, so about half of the issues that folks or challenges that folks talked about, where I was part of the conversation, had to do with the cost and volume of log data and what do I do with it and how do I deal with it. And let me dig in further just to talk about, I mentioned like we've got more consumers dealing with it now. The problem kind of reflects itself in different ways. Same problem reflecting itself in different ways based on these different consumers, right? So dev is typically, and what we see in our user base, this is the largest group of folks that are using log management solutions, and their complaints or their challenges are the ones that I've articulated, which is, man, there's a lot of data in there and there's a lot of noise in there, and I really only need about 10 or 20% of it. And then some things happen. I find a bug. I've got an outage or whatever, and then all of a sudden I need kind of all of it. But I don't want to have to wade through all of it all the time. And I'm constantly being told, like, I can't get to, we're running out of budget. You're in overages. It's more than we're licensed for, and all of those kinds of things. And so what developers find themselves doing is, like, either they're in the situation where they're not getting all of the data that they need, because it's like, well, this is what we're budgeted for, and past that, so we're just putting a hard quota on it, and we're not taking any more in, for the day or the month or whatever that happens to be, and like a whole bunch of important stuff probably drops off because I've just shut it off. Or the other thing is they are biting the bullet and they're dropping everything in, but now your developers are complaining about, like, man, I get a lot of false alerts. I've got to wade through a lot of different log lines. There's a lot of stuff in there that I don't really need, and it actually clogs up my ability to be useful. If I look at the second group, the SREs, and this is, like I said, the smallest kind of contingent of users, at least in looking at our user base and looking at folks that I've talked to that are using kind of the classic log management tool, these folks are typically using more full stack observability. Which, by the way, a lot of the devs I speak with, like, they look at a full stack observability tool and they're like, yeah, that's great, but I don't need all of that. And quite honestly, having to deal with all of the capability in there makes the interfaces complicated. I don't want to have to worry about all that stuff. I want to be able to just get to a log, do the searches that I want to be able to do, find the stuff that I want, and then move on, because I want to get to what I'm supposed to be doing, which is writing code. SREs, on the other hand, have kind of a different outlook. Quite honestly, they don't necessarily want to do log management either, because what's in there doesn't help them support service level objectives. It doesn't help them meet service level agreements. They don't necessarily get it's not obvious that the indicators that they want are in there, but they want to have some semblance of what's going on, so that as they interface with developers, or as they kind of discover problems or notice issues, they can have an intelligent conversation back with the developer and maybe help with a little correlation, those kinds of things. But what I find is most SREs are like, look, we have no idea what's in there. Applications change, the application stack changes. That means the volume changes, the nature of the data, what's in there, that changes on a fairly regular basis, which gives us kind of fits in terms of figuring out, well, or being able to predict how much are we going to need from a storage perspective, so that we can budget for our observability tool and everything that we bring in. There's also some typically interesting things in there as well. And there are metrics that they would love to be able to glean from log data to help them with SLOs. But a lot of times those metrics are locked into lines that require crazy, ridiculous parsing to try to get out, and basically the hands go up and, like, I'm not even going to bother with it. The other thing that happens too, and sometimes SREs are responsible for this, sometimes the biz side folks are responsible for this, is that we find that you'll get some maybe confidential or PII type data will leak in. We've had some folks where even running things in Amazon and mistakenly allowing usernames and other stuff to kind of drop in, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, I've actually got that. I just noticed the problem, but now I've been retaining my logs for 30 days, and I've got 30 days of user in plain text information in my logs. That's probably not a very good thing. And right, so now we've got to scramble to get rid of that, because basically, again, I'm dumping everything in there and then trying to figure out what I have and deal with it. So the net effect of all of that, hopefully I've amped up the pain, and you guys are like, all right, let's move on and get to how we fix this. But the net effect of that is it still takes too long to troubleshoot, to resolve problems. We miss the service level objectives that we set, which is kind of, as an SRE, what we're managed for. And, at the end of the day, the business is like, look, there's data in there that I want, but it's locked in the observability tool. We end up getting compliance issues. So kind of all of these things happening, and a lot of folks asking, how do we deal with this, and what do we do? So for us, that is what we're calling next generation log management. Really what that translates into is this is log management with a telemetry pipeline. This is about getting to the data and applying data engineering principles while the data is in motion before you actually have to store it and index it and all of that. So before it gets to where it costs the most, let me be able to do a bunch of things with it. Conceptually, we think about that as understand, optimize, and respond. Certainly not rocket science or quantum physics, but if you think about it, one of the biggest problems is knowing kind of what's in there. And when I know what's in there, figuring out, what do I need? What do I not need? Well, if I'm dealing with millions and millions of log lines, like that's a very hard problem, difficult problem to figure out manually. So for us, the telemetry pipeline at the front of your log management system should actually help you figure out what is in there. Allow me to profile that data and then come back and tell you like, hey, this stuff you can probably filter out. This you can, maybe dedupe. This you can aggregate because there's a lot of redundancy, lots of options. And as we grow and build, as you use that data and learn more, like, let's leverage the power of machine learning on all of this data to figure out sentiment and value to kind of know automatically, like, what should I do? So, and not what should I do with the standard stuff. Like if it's a Windows syslog, like if it's an Apache log, that's kind of a known quantity. Like I don't necessarily need help figuring out what to do with that. I'm more interested in what about the logs that are being generated by my applications, the things that are bespoke, the things that are particular to me, and helping navigate all of that stuff. And once I have a picture of that and an understanding of it, and I've got the ability to figure out some things to do with it, and things in place so that I understand when it changes, now let me optimize it. And optimize is kind of a big umbrella of doing a bunch of things. Certainly it is overall, let me try to reduce the volume of the log data that I would index and store and have at the ready. Because if I don't need it, I don't want to have to worry about it. But then also give me the ability to potentially enrich it, to transform it. Look, we find lots of situations where all of this log data, in some cases, a bunch of log data really just equates itself to a metric or a couple of metrics and counts and things like that. Well, man, it's great to be able to make all of that kind of log data go away and distill it down to the metric that actually is the most salient and makes the most sense to use. And while you're going through that and being able and profiling my data, let's notice the things that shouldn't be in there and either automatically redact or alert me when you find something that is questionable so that we can take action on it. And the taking action thing, like that's the third part of that this is respond. Respond for us is interesting because, as I've kind of been hinting at, log data changes. And I've been saying that the value of log data is temporal, which is to say that I need it when I need it. And when I don't need it, I don't want it. Well, for us, the pipeline should help you understand that and figure it out so that as you're going along and, hey, maybe I've done a wonderful job and I'm optimizing, I've removed a bunch of stuff that I don't need. I'm compressing down, I'm aggregating, I'm turning into metrics, whatever. But a situation arises that where, man, I want full fidelity of that. And I kind of need full fidelity now because I need to resolve a problem and get on it quickly. Pipeline should automatically switch and say, oh, I've noticed that condition. Allow me to make an adjustment so that you're now getting everything that you need. Or something changed at the back end and the data that the application or the application stack is producing is now different and it's way more. So all those rules that I had in place to help me, reduce and make things efficient, like now there's a whole bunch of data leaking through. I'm getting this big surge. Man, alert me to that and give me the opportunity to prevent that from going into my very expensive log management storage so that I don't get hit with an overage or, 2 or 3x my bill, or in some cases 10x my bill, because developer made a change or somebody changed a configuration and we weren't aware of it and a rule didn't catch it. And now all of a sudden I'm sitting on a whole bunch of data that I didn't know was going to be in there and I didn't need at the end of the day, but it's already in. And unfortunately, I don't really want it. So understand, optimize, respond, figure out what's in there before it goes in. Do the right things to it to use the data when you need it, and then have that pipeline tell me what's going on, alert, and adjust as I'm going through so that I am making the best use of all this data. That platform for us looks like this. And let me walk through kind of left to right, and then we'll actually get into it. So for us, next generation log management, by the way, it is a fairly open thing. And our telemetry pipeline is part of a larger component that we're calling Copilot. And within Copilot is not just the pipeline, but it's that data profiler. It's that thing where I'm going to take a look at the data and understand it, give me some sense of what's in there and how much of it is valuable, and give me the ability to do some actions with it. And for us, that data can be a whole bunch of things, right? Certainly we provide an agent, but there's lots of other things that broadcast telemetry data. And we're more than happy to use those things as input as well. And once in there, profile, do the optimizing part, give you lots of options, not just in terms of what am I going to do in terms of making enriching or optimizing that data, but where do I want to send it? Because as I mentioned, like there are now new consumers or more consumers, and a lot of folks that we talk to are using several different log management solutions at the same time. Like I said, developers don't want to use a full stack observability tool. SREs are typically more in a full stack observability tool, and they want their log data in there to be part of it so they can see everything in one place. We recognize that. So yes, we have log analysis, but there are lots of other folks that do log management, and we're happy to provide that data through pipeline into those places as well. There's a couple of other things that we're doing. So there's a little bit of future kind of forward-looking stuff in our architecture here that I'll talk about a little bit. One of those in the lower left is what we call Mezmo Edge, actually available now, but this allows us to distribute that pipeline processing in different places. So if you've got, say, a situation where you need to redact PII data, you definitely don't want that to leave your network. You can deploy Edge inside of your VPC or inside of your network, so that data never, that PII data never egresses, never leaves. And in fact, there may be situations where you've got log data that you want to keep locally. Edge would allow you to do that and never have to egress it. It'll stay there. The other thing that we're seeing, and other folks are starting to think about this as well and adopt it, and you'll see a thing called customer-owned storage in the lower right. Look, at the end of the day, like we recognize that storage is commodity. What's important is your ability to index and search what's going in there so that you can get to it quickly. One of the things that we're doing and we do now is the ability to archive and rehydrate, right? So things that you look at that you say, look, I want to keep this, but I don't necessarily need it right away. I don't necessarily need it now. But down the road, I may ask myself some questions that I'm not asking now, and I want to be able to get to that historical data. You can, in Mezmo's platform, archive that and then run it back through pipeline, do different things with it if you want to in terms of optimizing and enriching and all of that, and play that dump that into log analysis or someplace else so that you can do the work of looking at it and answering those questions that you hadn't really been thinking about, but then wanted historical data to be able to get to. Forward looking, we're building out the ability to do those to do that stuff, but to be able to be more fine grained and essentially do search on that data that's in your storage. So rather than saying, hey, play back everything from this time period to this timeline, this time point to this time point, what I want to do is I want to go back through 14 days and I want to find all of the instances of this or all of the occurrences of this app, or every time this app had this kind of error, or all of those kinds of things as well. Basically, all of the kinds of searches that you would do in your log management tool on this, really expensive storage. Actually, let me be able to do that, on my S3 bucket or on my Azure Blob or in Snowflake or whatever that happens to be. So this is what we are talking about and providing when we talk about next generation log management. Let me now do a quick transition and let's actually walk through what this looks like. And I'm going to do a quick, before I do that, bounce over, I notice like Simon Bennett has asked a couple of questions. I'll try to. There's a lot in here, which is good. I'll get to some of these now, and then maybe Scott, we can get to them a little later on, or make sure we get to everything at the end. So telemetry, another word for analytics. Look, at the end of the day, telemetry data is just data that's generated automatically by a machine and typically remotely. So it needs to be pulled together from the source and aggregated to be made useful. It's also typically in a format generated by a machine. So applying data engineering principles to it makes it more kind of human useful. So that's so it is telemetry, another word for analytics. I mean, the two are certainly related. And AI learning is a great start. What about human and manual overrides to teach the system what to do? Absolutely. I would tell you, like, that's how a good machine learning model gets made, right? Is not just feeding data into it, but also feeding human input into it as well. And I'm going to say then, for the rest of these questions, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let's actually switch and talk through and walk through an example. So,
okay, yeah, Bill, I see your screen.
Amazing. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. So what I'm showing you now, this is log analysis. And what I want to do is walk you through that process that I just articulated. So just a couple of steps. One, I want to give you a picture of before. And what you're seeing here is a bunch of data being generated by a proprietary application. You may see some other kind of standard like HTTP log type stuff or Apache log type stuff leak its way in here, but most of this is generated by a homegrown application with several modules. And what I'll show you is kind of, here's the before picture and what it looks like, and then apply data profiling, show you what data profiling finds, and then the actions that I can take on it, build out a pipeline, and then get you to, and basically, by the way, show you all the things that a pipeline will potentially help you with before you even get to the log management part of it, and then give you the after picture. Here's what it looks like now. Oh, and by the way, as things change, the pipeline will change, and the nature and profile of the data will change. And timing wise, you may see it happen as I'm going along, but if not, I can certainly show you kind of the historical evidence of, like, oh, look, here's where the pipeline switched and started grabbing more full fidelity and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll wrap it all up, and we can do more questions at that point. So here I am looking at actually log lines coming in from my application, and I can quickly show you the way this is working now is this basic pipeline. So my application, the BGL supercomputer, is generating log data, and I can take a look at that by tapping on it in my pipeline, and you can see I'm dropping it now into Mezmo log analysis, and not kind of anything happening, straight pass through, log data going in. So if I wanted to, at the end of the day, work with this log data, I could. It's in here. I can run searches on it. I can look for stuff. I can, understand kind of where some of these info lines are. And what I would tell you is, looking at this now, like, gosh, look at that. That looks pretty redundant, and like 90% of each of those lines is the same, and maybe a little bit of difference and all that. So, man, why am I putting it all in there? And by the way, this is like an info line. Like, why would I do that? I certainly don't need to be paying a lot of money to store and index all of that stuff. And if I look at this over time, right, and break this down by log level, right, you can see that the things that I would probably really want to care about most of the time, my fatal issues, my errors, warnings, and things like that, these are all clearly highly overshadowed by, and I'll go live here, highly overshadowed by my info log lines by like orders of magnitude, right? In fact, if I pop back over here, you'll see I'm over the course of 60 minutes, I've had 35.1 million lines go through this thing. So then the question becomes, well, what can pipeline help me? How does pipeline help me figure out what's going on here? So I can maybe skinny some of this down and reduce it so that I'm not having to pay for all of that stuff, because quite honestly, I'm not looking at it. I don't really need it. There's a couple ways that we do this. And inside pipeline, so I can add what we call processors, a bunch of things to put in between my source and my destination to do all of the magic and things that I would want to do with the data. One of those processors that I would input is this data profiler. And what data profiler will do, and rather than just create it and have you wait while it does all the profiling, I have, in cooking show style, of course, run it already. And you can see here an output of that profile. I'll pause here for a minute and give you a little bit of what I'm showing you so that you understand it. And because we're in the understand phase, right? So understand, optimize, respond. Here we are in the understand part. I had a whole bunch of log data. I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, there's a lot of stuff in there. I probably don't need all of that, but I don't want to have to go through it manually. What all is in there and what can I do with it? So in this case, this particular profile is showing you that I grabbed a little over 1 million events in a compressed time period. So I said basically the way it works default is it says, give me the first 1 million events. Because I'm putting this in a pipeline, I can tweak that and I can basically sample so I get a longer period of time. I can do a bunch of other things so that I get kind of different pictures of this data, which may or may not affect the results of the profile. But essentially, for these 1 million events, this is 441 megs. So look, maybe not huge at the end of the day, but if I'm getting 1 million events like every 5 minutes or 1 minute or 2 minutes, then like size goes up, and then it's actually really significant. Down from this, and it's going to give me, by the way, some breakdown as well, like how many hosts, what apps did it see, if there are event types, standard event types that it recognizes, it will show me that as well. But then it's going to show me all of the patterns that it found. And down here, then all of the apps that it recognized and log breakdown by log level and by log type and all of that kind of stuff. The interesting thing here is the patterns. And Seema, going back to your question about the human intervention, here is where some of that human intervention steps in, right? So these are all patterns that come from my custom application. If this was, standard HTTP log type stuff or, kind of a known platform, this would be a different story. And my expectation would be like, man, tell me what to do with that stuff. Here, Mezmo is like, look, we found, everything. There's some stuff in here that isn't kind of standard, is proprietary to you. Why don't you tell us what you'd like to do with it or what you need? I look at this first one and I can see, first of all, that it's an info log line, and the 315,000 lines means it's about 30% of my total haul for this. So if I kind of take this as a random sample, I can say like, all right, so there's a good way for me to, maybe hack off 30% of my lines, because this info line generating blah, 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 like, honestly, I don't really care about it. And it's 38 of the 441 meg. So it's a little less than 10%. So the process log option gives me the ability to come in and do some things with it. And for our first version of Copilot, like this is the first set of things. So I can filter, meaning get rid of it. I can sample, meaning, give me every 100 or every 1,000 or every million line. Dedupe, meaning compress it down so that I get, one line and you tell me how many times I got it. Or throttle, which is like, basically X number of lines in a given time period or over a period of time. In this case, I'm just going to say, let's filter that stuff out. Like I honestly, I don't really need it right now at the end of the day. When I do that, when I make the selection, if I pop back up here, you can see that I have, in applying that logic, I would reduce my log volume by 8.67%. And like, hey, we're off, and this is all good. If I go down to the next one, I would say like, oh, that's a fatal error. I probably want to actually keep all of those, and I'm kind of bummed that I'm having that many. So probably some things for me to look at. But there are some other info log level type things that I might come in here. I might look at this fatal error and say, data storage interrupt. I'm kind of familiar with that. I don't need to see all of those, but maybe I want to dedupe. So like compress those down to maybe one line every 5 minutes or one line every 10 minutes and give me the number of times that line occurred, all of that kind of stuff. And as I'm doing this, you'll see I'm making some inroads into just attacking that problem of too much log volume. And I can go on and on. And once I've decided, like, yep, I'm at a place where let's apply this. This is a good starting point. If I click apply processors, what happens is it creates what's called a processor group. This is then a set of logic that I can go ahead and use in my pipeline and apply it, and it will automatically then apply the things that I've articulated here. So rather than do that, of course, again, cooking show style, I have created a pipeline. And here it is. And you can see I've enhanced and done a lot more with this. So this is that same data that I showed you in the beginning, where all the data is kind of coming through. And I'll do a quick tap here so that you can see that events are flowing through. Yep, this thing is live. It's and all of that. There are a couple of things that I want to point out to really bring home that notion of optimize and then respond. First of all, you can see, and I'll zoom in on it and let me jump back here, this thing called LVR processor group. So this is the log volume reduction that I automatically created with my profile. And so it's doing its job, but I've done then some other things as well. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to see some of the power of this pipeline. And there are three kind of parts of that power that I want to show you. One of those is just the additional processing that you can do. So I've added a router here so that I'm breaking up and looking at log lines by level. And I'm saying then kind of sample these, and for info, like give me 1 in a million or 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 for debug and unmatched. Maybe I'm sampling at a different rate so that I get those differently. But then you'll also notice that I have my errors and fatal and criticals actually being routed to a processor group that allows me to automatically generate alerts and send those out. In this case, I can send those out via email. I can do it via Slack, kind of all of the common channels that you would expect. So now, before the data actually gets into being stored and indexed and being looked at there, I'm actually getting ahead of the issue and being able to do some alerting so that I know what's going on. You'll also notice that I've got a couple of different sources that I'm sending things to. And then the last thing I want to point out, and I was kind of hoping it would pop into that, but it hasn't. That's all right. I'll kind of show you the evidence of it. I've got a situation where it's possible for my pipeline to be in what we call a couple of different states. One is normal and one is incident. This allows me to essentially automatically adjust what data I'm bringing in and what I'm doing with it based on a given condition or situation. In this case, when that alert gets tripped because I get a certain level of error or fail or critical log lines, I can then put the pipeline into what's called incident mode. It happens automatically. I'm going to trip it now manually so that you can just see what happens. And then what I'm doing is, rather than putting my data through all of these processors, I'm actually dropping full fidelity into, in this case, Mezmo log analysis. So I've said, look, I've discovered an error. I'm probably going to have to do some debugging and some other things. Give me everything. Start dropping everything into log analysis so that I can see it and so that I can see what's going on. I'm going to drop this back to normal mode now, and I will, let's see if we look at, say, like the last hour. Here you can see over the last hour, I'm showing you in the graph at the top, a little bump where, we found an error. And so we went into incident mode and we were essentially holding on to everything, and then things quieted back down again. So what I've got here, this is the optimize and respond piece of this. And essentially what's happening then is I'm bringing that data in. I've used my profile to identify some places where I can reduce, and I'm doing that log volume reduction. I've also decided to apply some other logic to add an alert in so that I can get alerted before it gets dropped into my log management system, and so that my pipeline can respond and grab all of the data that it needs, that I may need as a developer to be able to debug, or that SRE may need to be able to debug, or whoever happens to be looking at things. I've now got all that there in my index storage to be able to look at it. But in the end, what I'm going to call like this clean view of log management, the log management screen, in this case, log analysis, looks like is this. So here you can see I had just gone through and gotten some errors. And though you can see that really what's being dumped into my log management tool now is just errors. What was 34 million lines before, now, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, like this is 99,000 lines. So I've really skinnied this down to be only the things that I absolutely need. And then my pipeline flips, and you can actually see, I'm gonna do the little cursor wave because I don't have my annotation turned on, where between like 1313 and 1319 over on the right hand side in my vertical bar graph, you can see here that I did go to full fidelity for a few minutes because I noticed that we were getting some errors, and when the rate of errors dropped down, I went ahead and went back to normal. And then if I look at this from just a kind of pure reporting perspective to bring this home, I've done a bit of a side by side for you so you can compare. So if you look at the stuff on the right, so the 4 panels where you can see logs without pipeline, number of errors, you can see a breakdown of those log levels, as well as kind of the input of data and all that kind of stuff. Notice a couple of things. First of all, 14 million, 14.1 log lines, 98,000 errors, but a hugely significant, like 10 million of those 14 million lines were info level log lines. And then only 16 million were error and only 14 million were fatal. And yet I'm generating, all of these errors. So clearly, not only am I without pipeline dumping a lot of noise in, but I was also generating a lot of false positives or false errors that I'm probably wasting a bunch of time chasing down. If you look at the left side, this is the now with pipeline. I've reduced the logs that I'm looking at over a period of a day from 14 million down to 2 million. I've also condensed my errors down. So I've hopefully gotten rid of a lot of the false positives, and only down to the ones that I really care about. And if you look at like what I'm actually keeping and what I'm holding on to, it's the fatals, it's the errors, and a little bit of the info lines that might provide me with the things that I need. But you'll also notice, if you go down to the lower left-hand graph, the bumps show you when my pipeline made adjustments to grab full fidelity of data. You can see the spikes both for errors and for now I'm grabbing data. And again, you can kind of see the sequence of like, man, I got a bunch of spikes. Now I'm grabbing all of the data related to those potential errors so that I've got that in hand and ready to go. So I'm not just chopping the data off. I'm not just saying, well, I'm sorry, we're done and we can't have any more, but I'm actually being very smart about it and grabbing what I need when I need it, so that hopefully now, I can lower that mean time to resolution. The things that I'm getting are exactly what I need to be able to meet my SLOs. And hopefully now the business also, I've got something to share with them, et cetera, down the road. Although I confess, like I didn't necessarily show all of that. So that is Mezmo's version of next generation log management. And I will stop screen sharing and drop in. And I kind of went through all the recap, but here it is for you to be able to look at. What we mean by next generation log management is being able to use telemetry pipeline to understand what data you're looking at, what's in there, and do it in motion before you have to retain it. Optimize it so that you're only retaining the things that you need, and then respond so that when conditions change, when things change, you're alerted to it and you're getting actually the data that you need because the pipeline automatically adjusts itself to be able to deal with it. And that, Scott, is the story of next generation log management from Mezmo.
Very cool. Very cool. Very powerful. One of the questions that I had as you were showing that, I mean, you showed like in the example case, how much it reduced, the log lines and the errors. What do your customers typically see in terms of reductions?
Yeah, look, I would tell you it's all over the board, right?
Sure.
On average, on the low end, it's 20 or 30%, and on the high end, we've had some situations I won't name the customer obviously, but somebody who was dumping all of their Cloudflare log into their log management system, and like on the off chance that I may need it, and was probably using it like once a month, and so we reduced what he was putting in there by 90% through like aggregating and generating metrics and some of those other things, so that he was actually getting a better picture of what he needed.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, one of the other things that, it's like the thing that would concern me is sort of, if I were in charge of deciding, um, just like not correctly anticipating the unknown unknowns, so like setting it so that it's cutting off too much stuff. But I saw in that graph how it's intelligently grabbing a bunch, around errors or certain conditions. But how much of that is user control? And I think this gets back into whose question was that? I think it was Sama's question. About like the AI learning figures out when it needs to grab more, and then how much do you have to do as a user to get in there and say, no, I actually wanted more data here, or I actually didn't need this data. Like, what's that process?
Yeah, look, I would tell you that what you've just described can very typically be the process. Like, it's completely. Let's not be. I don't want to make sure that I'm not overusing that two letter acronym that I think is being abused a lot, like too much now. Like, at the end of the day, a lot of what our customers are doing, and really what we would recommend even out of the gate, is like you should be tuning that. What we're doing with Copilot, and especially with that profiler, is just giving you the opportunity to see everything that's in there in one place, as opposed to you having to kind of scroll through millions of lines and do lots of different searches and do kind of all of this manual investigation. And most of the folks that work with it then actually do what I did, which is like, well, I'm going to choose what I decide to include and not include, and things like that. Actual recommendations from us aren't actually in the product yet. That's something that we're working on, but like, we want to be very kind of thoughtful about it and not just kind of throw stuff out there.
Yeah.
Certainly we want to be able to recognize common logs and be able to say like, hey, this is a common HTTP log. Like, you don't need the info level stuff. You can do like it, right? But I think there are more insightful things like, gosh, why is 90% of what you're indexing an info level log line? Or,
Yeah.
why, like, I see this set of things that's 80% kind of redundant and only changes based on like a customer ID or an IP address or something like that. Like, certainly, like, you point out the good candidates. To me, it's the beginning. It's not the end. It's absolutely your folks that have to go in and do the tuning and decide what to do and not do. The other thing that I'll say, Scott, and maybe too long-winded an answer, but it inspired me a little bit. You had talked about, well, okay, what if I'm turning too much off and I have a problem and I realize I filtered too much out. Well, I don't have that log data that I need. One of the other things that we do, and I highly, highly recommend this, is give you the ability to simply archive everything off into cold storage. Stick it into S3, stick it into a blob. And this, I think, has turned out to help folks in lots of different ways. First of all, to the point of like, I got rid of too much and I've got this problem. I need to be able to go back and look at that stuff. Well, you were archiving it. Now rehydrate it, run it through a pipeline, and then you can then actually do a bunch of stuff in pipeline to that data, so you can get to exactly what you need and do your investigation and all of that. We had a situation where a customer actually discovered that they had PII data in plain text usernames and passwords in their log data, and they were like, well, I can't just dump this 14 days worth of So, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to. Actually, I can dump it, and then I can rerun it through because I had been archiving it. I can rehydrate it. I can mask the PII data. Now I've got the data that I needed, for the past 14 days, but I've corrected the problem that I allowed to leak through. So there's all kinds of uses like that. So in my mind, like if you're not archiving all of your log data into the cheap place and to make sure that you've got it on the off chance that you need it, like you're missing out.
Oh yeah, no, that's awesome. And you'd mentioned about the recommendations, but it almost seems like, as I'm looking at the tool, one of the things that seems really cool would be really valuable is that you've got best practices embedded in some of the processors that you provide. You guys look at this data all the time at log data and help people manage it, and so those processors that you provide in the different sort of packages that are in there are sort of best practices in themselves.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we're doing upfront, so we have an entity called a shared source, which basically means that I've got an agent that's transmitting, or many agents that are transmitting to HTTP endpoint or whatever. I want to call that a shared source so that I can have multiple pipelines use it. But the other thing that we can do is apply automatic parsing rules to it, so that as we recognize things coming in, going into the source, like we'll reformat so that it's easier to read, so that it's easier to grab, etc. And we actually have a good degree or a high degree of parsing capability inside of pipeline. So you can have situations where, man, there's some kind of important data like locked in this log line in this plain text thing. I wish I could get at it and turn it into a metric, or at least just turn it into a field so that I could do some logical evaluation on it, or I could do some search on it or something like that. And pipeline gives you the ability to do that. As well as like aggregating, recognizing PII data, all of that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, we've tried to make it as easy as possible. Certainly there's more to do, but to your point, let's build it for the stuff that's known. Let's build that in, and we're constantly doing that as we go.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Hey, another question here. I'm wondering, what's the best way to get started if I already have some log management tools in place, maybe some legacy ones? Do I have to rip and replace them, or how does that work?
Yeah, certainly not. Like, and that's I hopefully pointed that out a little bit, but I tried to make the point that, like, while we provide an amazing log management tool, folks are using lots of other log management tools. To us, the key for next generation log management is that pipeline piece. And fortunately, pipeline works with name your favorite log management tool if you've got it. And we have customers that are using, and oftentimes more than one, and yeah, we're talking to that as well. So the get started piece is get pipeline in place, profile your data, attack that kind of top level problem, which is I'm putting too much in there, and do that with pipeline, and use your existing log management tool. You've got the whole user base; they're used to using it. They know how to use it and they're familiar with it. So you're not having to introduce a ton of change, but you can get to a ton of value.
Okay. All right. Hey, coming back to Sama's long list of questions, one of them was essentially about training. How much training is required for somebody to come into your tool and start getting some value out of it?
Yeah, look, there are a couple things here, right? Like I think we've built this to be as self-service as possible. It helps to have somebody, an admin, who is what I'll say in the know in terms of how pipeline works. That's certainly not an FTE, but there are some things that you can do, some configuration things that you can do to make pipeline part of it more self-service. I had alluded to one of those, which is setting up shared sources. So rather than me having to find the data and figure out how to bring it in, having a pipeline admin set up a bunch of shared sources. So, okay, now I've got the most common data that I need. One of the other ones that I alluded to in the demo was a thing that we call processor groups, which is there's probably a set of common processing that I want to do on these shared data sources. So like, let me create those so that it's Legos and I can just grab those and drop them in. And then honestly, at the end of the day, the whole Lego analogy works from the standpoint of, I just say, you know what, I want to add a processor. Here's my list of processors, drag it in. There's a window to configure. In some cases, the configuration is drop downs and click and point. In other cases, maybe I want to write JavaScript or something to be, to be a little more fine grained, or do some fancier, more complicated things. And certainly all of that is possible. So yeah, it's, I'd say that we can serve a whole range of folks, but certainly you can get started without a ton of coding expertise and things like that.
Okay, excellent. Probably time for one more question here, and it has to do with scale. A lot of people are adding microservices architectures, and starting to bring in a lot more see a lot more log data come in. What are some of the best ways to scale log management for those organizations with rapidly growing and evolving microservices architectures?
Yeah, I guess I would say like the answer to that is pipeline, really. Part of it is, because of the baseline value prop there is like, I don't have to dump everything into one place and then try to figure out what to do with it. Pipeline gives you the ability to bring all of that in and chop it up and route it to the people, route the right data to the right people that care. And typically, being able to profile all of that and figure out and understand like, oh, look, like I can, by microservice or by layers in the application stack or whatever that is, to divide this data up, and I can send it to lots of different places. I can turn it into things that, make more sense for a particular consumer. That's to me the best way for you to scale as your application stack is growing and more stuff is going in there. And there's more demand on that data.
All right, great. So Bill, if somebody wants to get started with Mezmo, what would you recommend?
Mezmo.com, click on free trial and generate an account, and away you go. And we've got some great interactive stuff that actually walks you through how to get started building your first pipeline and dumping that into log analysis.
Awesome. All right. Well, Bill, thanks a lot. Really appreciate this. This was just incredibly informative, and appreciate all the insights in the Q&A too. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Scott. My pleasure. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great day.
All right. And we've got, oh, sorry about that. I'm having a little camera trouble today. We've got one more piece of business here today. It is the gift card. And the winner of the gift card is Ted Ross from Wisconsin. So Ted, congratulations. You won the $250 Amazon gift card. We'll be in touch to get you that card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Mezmo for making this event possible. And thanks always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.